Hi, I'm Tania Van Pelt with Happiness Series, and I'm delighted to be here with Elana Kilkenny, an intuitive counselor and feng shui designer in New York City. Thank you so much, Elana, for joining us again.
Thank you, Tania.
And what should we talk about today?
I think one of the things that we were talking about today is how do you suss out the difference between your own intuition about things, your own gut about things, versus possibly fear. And then it kind of dovetails with a conversation about signs in our life.
Right, right. I'm a big believer in signs. If I see a hawk, it means something, and then when it doesn't play out, I'm confused. I think of myself as an intuitive person, and yet sometimes I don't know if I am or what it means or what's going on.
Well, I would say, first of all, obviously you are a very intuitive person, but one of the things that I always say to people is it's much easier to be intuitive, about other people and about other things that are not as close to us, because we don't have the same filter about those things. So for instance, it's much easier as an intuitive for me to work with you and to kind of see the overview for you. But when it gets to my own things, or my things that maybe I'm looking for my own signs or asking the universe for signs about, as much as I'm emotionally colored about something or getting my head too involved about what things mean, it can be a little tricky. So let's maybe walk it through a little bit. Like as an example, sometimes, you might be thinking of a question in terms of something that's going on in your life that you're wanting an answer for. So sometimes it's a pretty common practice actually to ask for like signs, like show me the signs of what direction to go.
Or to flip a coin even.
Yeah, or flip a coin, or just see like the signs that happen. So, whether it's, for a lot of people it's peripheral signs that happen. So for instance, maybe it's a conversation they start overhearing, as they're walking, they'll hear that kind of topic, or maybe it's, like a sign on a bus that goes by. There's signs everywhere if you're paying attention to it. But one of the keys is a few things that I always say, which is trying to empty yourself from an expectation about what the answer is, I think is one of the hardest things. So for instance, you can ask a specific question and signs can come up. And I would say just kind of, you can follow in the energy and direction of that. But don't hold on so tightly about what the end game of it is. So as an example, maybe is there a situation in your life where there was a sign and you kind of felt like you got it wrong and it confused you?
Well, absolutely, and so often. But in this specific case, a couple of years ago, I was shooting a pilot for a sitcom series that I wanted to produce with my producing partner, and we had a cast and the location, everything seemed to be lining up, and it really seemed that all signs pointed to doing it, and doing it then. It was like a sweet spot window of before the restaurant opened and after the construction was done. But it turns out we shot during construction, and it ended up being a much trickier shoot. And I felt like I had been following the signs. But then I thought, if I had really been following the signs, I would have just delayed it or said, let's get another location. Let's take more time and hire actors that really work with the role. And I didn't do any of that.
Well, I mean, let's just even backtrack a little bit. What I would say to you, the first thing that I'm kind of hearing with that is you don't even know necessarily what that experience was meant for. So I hear that and I look at it, and I'm kind of pulling back a little bit of perspective and saying, you absolutely were meant to have that experience. You absolutely were meant to have that practice, I would even say, in terms of what it even means and what it entails. I mean, have you ever shot a sitcom before that?
No, no, but I mean, and it's interesting you say that, because my expectation and the end goal was, I'm going to have this thing on HBO or somewhere, and that's gonna just take off, and it's going to be a wonderfully expansive experience. So that was my expectation, and it was heavily weighted, and I did feel that weight, but it didn't feel so bad.
Well, because it was a dream. It was, I mean, you liked the end of that. So it's not that there was anything bad in it. I would almost help you with the vocabulary and say, but part of it, it's interesting you use the word expectation, and the truth is that expectation and signs don't really meet very well together in terms of being able to really define what they mean.
That's so heavy. I mean, that's a beautiful point. Did you all get that? Expectations and signs are not...
They don't work well together, because what happens is an expectation, by its very nature, means it's from your mind. It means that you're projecting what the future is with it. It's not coming actually from an intuitive place. It's coming from a whole lot of...
Because anything that comes from here is not intuitive. What intuition would be here.
Well, I would say, that's where it gets a little tricky. I mean, sometimes what we think in our mind dovetails with what intuitive is. So I almost wouldn't necessarily, that could almost confuse you a little bit with it. But what I would say is the expectation part Like, meaning, I expect that this is going to go this way, and then it's going to show up in it. There's a difference between having a vision, meaning it almost has a different feeling even in your body. It's not so driven by what you want and where your head is. It's almost like it comes to you. Like sometimes we'll just even get, it almost feels like a movie or just an idea, like, oh, HBO might just come into your head for it. But as opposed to, and then I see this, and this happen.
Right.
Now, when it just comes to you as something, okay, like as an example, it could have just come to you as even a seedling. I could see this on HBO.
Instead of, we're going to shop it there.
Well, not, I would even take it a step back from that. Maybe part of that, what it is sometimes, you know, intuition or signs of things don't have a time attached to it. We put the time attached to it. Maybe there is a project that you're going to be doing that is perfect for HBO. Maybe it does have something to do with the seed of that kind of sitcom that you were working on, but maybe it wasn't at that right time. Maybe it wasn't with the people that were involved in it. And maybe it was perfect, the people that were involved in it and the experience you had, because you realized what worked for you and what didn't, and you need to reflect on that. What were the aspects that felt in flow, would be a word I would say. You know, and what were the aspects that felt more rigid? What were the aspects that felt like there was more resistance and wasn't working? So I know when we were speaking a little bit about it before, some of it was even having to do with, you know, you saw even certain timing of certain things happen in terms of the shoot, or even where it was supposed to be, and then things change. Well, that's the nature of the business. That happens all the time.
Of course, yeah.
And so learning the flexibility of that, learning to think on your feet and be like, oh, you know what, we actually did maybe hire enough people. So instead of then judging, oh, well, now we blew this, well, next time, now I'll know that. You know, next time now I'll think about that. Maybe you scout a location. Maybe it was about a few follow-up calls. Some of it could be really practical in terms of, well, is that location still happening in terms of the viability of what was happening then, as opposed to maybe where it was when you first set it up. So a lot of it is you're learning, and what is all that about? That's about, okay, well, you're learning some fine details about the next time that you go into something like that. What are some of the levels of maybe organization, beyond even vision, that need to happen so that the project is grounded enough so that there is that flow that you're looking for. But a lot of it is in the way we then look at things, and this is the big thing that I say to you, is in retrospect, often we'll look at it and we'll just be so disappointed. And we'll either blame, whether it's even rightful or not, blame the other people who it didn't happen, or blame ourselves, or or usually what happens is we're blaming other people, but really the people we're blaming the most is ourselves.
Oh my God. Totally true.
But we're missing kind of the gold in it, which is sometimes signs do point us in a direction, but it's our end conclusions of what that means that are off. And sometimes we're not supposed to even decide what it's supposed to mean. It's really something like one of my greatest teachers was an energy healer, and she always said, follow the energy, follow the energy. And that applies to life, meaning you could follow, if you're in the moment, right? If you start noticing that things are maybe the shoots out, kind of feeling like it should go in a certain direction that go against what you were thinking, well, try a little bit of that. See what that flexibility lends it to.
That requires a level of trust that a lot of people, including me, I mean, I'm kind of seeing myself as I was back.
It was a few years ago, right?
Yeah, it was 2 years ago, and was it, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm seeing myself back then, and I'm thinking, I would not have trusted that. I would have said, and maybe even today I would say, I don't trust that it'll still happen. This is my window, this is that sweet spot, and if it doesn't, if I can't pull it together, regardless of external circumstances, then it ain't happening.
You see, this is where you probably get off the rails a lot of other times in your life, and where a lot of us do, which is you're confusing your intuition about when timing is supposed to happen, meaning the sweet spot and the timing. Versus what your will is telling you needs to happen. Now, there possibly could have been an initial intuition about when the right time was to have shot it, and you followed it, and you did do it. Where you could have been off in confusing will with intuition is, that story that this is the only time that this can happen, that actually doesn't feel actually intuitive. That actually feels like, because all the things were coming together, you kind of felt like this was the window.
The momentum had been built, right.
But a lot of times that's not the case. I mean, if you actually study, and I've done informal studying of this, if you actually listen to people who have been successful in different endeavors, especially in creative fields, but I would say in anything, if they really tell the real story of the history of how they got to like that series that really made it, or that book that really did it, a lot of times it actually wasn't when they thought it would really take off. You know, often a lot of artists will say, oh, you know, like they'll be asked, the director, did you know this movie was going to be like the biggest box office? And often they'll say no. Or they'll say, we actually thought this other thing that we did, this other project was going to be the really successful one, and it wasn't. There's something ephemeral about that. There's something that you can't quite capture or necessarily know. But often when you actually talk to people who have had those experiences, they'll actually say, well, if we hadn't had this bomb or this thing that happened that actually fell apart, we wouldn't have learned A, B, and C. And if we hadn't learned A, B, and C from that project that didn't, quote unquote, work out, we wouldn't have been prepared for the project that ended up working out, and we had all those components there, and we knew, oh, I remember when this happened, and now I knew how to do it. But the difference between people who are sort of successful in that and like basically hang in the game long enough, if you will, and have that trust long enough to not give up, is trust. Is basically saying, and trust or faith basically means you don't have the evidence that it's going to come back around again. You know, you don't have like the contract that says yes, this is going to happen. But
you're just doing it.
And you know what? If you have a dream, if it's something that is really important to you, if you have the passion, if you put action and perseverance in it, you know, you never know when it's going to come around again.
Right.
And it might be something completely different, but maybe the seed energy of what drew you to it comes. But that goes back to signs again. What I would say to you is you did follow the signs. You followed the signs and you put it together and you did it. Where you possibly stopped or had more trouble following the signs was maybe in the actual production, which is very human, because then a lot more was at stake. People's time was at stake, money was at stake, reputations were at stake, all sorts of different things were happening. You had all different components. And that's teaching you certain things about, oh, okay, this is the difference between my dream of what it is and the reality of it, and now I actually have some real information about what
they're
it looks
totally...
like. They're different.
They're not totally different. That's not fair.
Yeah.
But the I have to say I think that you're onto something. Yay! that expectations really stop the flow.
Yeah.
I mean, and my expectations are that things are going to look a certain way. Actors are going to be a certain way. I'm going to write something a certain way, and none of them are. I don't want to say live up to those expectations, because sometimes they're better, but sometimes they're worse.
Or they look worse in the moment. Like I'll give you.
They look worse in the moment. That's beautiful.
We don't have the 20/20 hindsight yet. I mean, I'll give you just another example.
If we could, you would be so rich.
No, we would all be rich. You know, I win the lottery years ago.
I can sell you 20/20 hindsight.
Exactly, I can sell that to you.
For people who are in the same boat as you with kids, or for people like me who finished their project and now still have the hope / expectation that will happen, what is a simple mantra that we can just tell ourselves to chill out?
I think part of it is, I would say, be careful of the stories that you tell yourself about it. I mean, I would say start with, you might want to start even writing down what are some of the stories you have around that experience, especially if it's an experience that's really important to you and still, there's still something larval about it that still might grow. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's not dead for you, this experience. So what I would say is, you might want to write about what are some of the stories that you even have about it now. As an example, one of the stories that I hear about it is, it was perfect timing. It was the only time that was going to happen. Well, I would debunk that story and say, how do I know that that's the only time that that's going to happen? And maybe just leave it, surrender that a bit, and leave some space to saying, I asked for the perfect timing of this project, or whatever this project is meant to be, to show itself to me. And then that's another way of inviting signs in, because for all you know, us just having this conversation now, there's so many things we could have talked about. This was 2 years ago.
Right.
For all you know, there'll be little whispers that will start coming to you, from the universe in some really concrete ways about what it means. Maybe, for instance, somebody will call you out of the blue, or maybe all of a sudden you'll see something and you realize, oh, that was the missing component that I would love that. Or maybe, maybe it's all of a sudden you meet somebody at HBO. You just don't know.
Right.
But you wouldn't be open to that had you keep on telling the story that was the time and it didn't work out and it blew up and it's over.
Right, and that was like my cautionary tale to people, as opposed to maybe not having a cautionary tale.
Maybe saying, maybe even just, how about sitting with this? I don't know what it all means yet, and I'm not meant to know yet.
I don't know what it means. It all means.
Well, I don't know what that whole experience was yet, and I'm open to learning what that could mean, and I'm open to realizing that maybe it's not over. That maybe there's something to it. You still move on with your life. You don't get hung up on it. But often, again, we are looking at the signs from our head and from our expectation, and that's when actually we're totally away from the intuition and from our energy. I mean, we started the conversation by talking about intuition. How do you know the difference with signs? And part of it is, again, when you find yourself the controlling head getting, and you know when it feels like it's a different energy, even in your body, when you're feeling rigid about something, when you're starting to overthink it, already you're out of an intuitive place. Already, it doesn't mean it's a bad place, it just means just recognize you're not in your intuition then, right, not in the sign.
I think what I'm getting from you is just, and everyone out there, don't judge your experiences so much, right?
It's don't judge it. It's also realize that you might need some perspective before you know what it actually all means.
Yeah, and be okay with that. That's a big one for me.
It's a big one. But then what is big about that is it does have to do with trust. I think
right.
one of the kernels that really just pinged for me when you were speaking is you might want to look at it in your life, and that's a whole other conversation in terms of what looking at it means, in terms of like where are you like how trusting are you in your life in terms of the way things work out, in terms of, you know, when you're trying something new and it doesn't show up the way that you do, you know, how do you respond to it? Because maybe some of the adjustment, and this is where some of the real change happens, has to do with, you know, it's funny, you're talking about meditating, like how well, meditation, where that could help you right then, is that in that particular moment, getting into a more meditative place and finding a center of, well, what is the present trying to tell me now? Now, what's my expectation of this happening? But what it is, and maybe, and I'll give you two different scenarios. Maybe it really was in the moment that had you been in the moment and in the flow, it would have changed. And maybe it would have worked out. Maybe. Just saying.
Right.
That's one. So where you lost that thread was in the actual experience of it. Maybe you weren't following your signs. But if something's really meant to happen, I really do believe this, and I really have seen this. It might not come in the exact same way.
Right.
But if you keep that dream alive in your heart, if you actually continue to put energy in the direction of what's important to you, if you stay pliable in terms of your trust and stay open-hearted enough to yourself first, in terms of not beating yourself up for an experience, but also in terms of your trust of other people and collaboration, and learn the lessons you're supposed to learn from it. You know, maybe there were certain collaboration lessons that you learned about who you want to collaborate and who you don't. It's all good information. So maybe all those signs were perfect, and that experience maybe was perfect. You just don't have the perspective yet.
Right. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Elana. As always, it's such a pleasure. We're so grateful to have you on our show.
Thank you. I'm so grateful you're here.
And we look forward to so many more. And tune in next week for a new video. And check out Elana on her site.
Yes.
And you can consult with her. She does it online, right?
I do intuitive counseling both out of my New York City home, but also I do Skype sessions as well as feng shui sessions.
And regular workshops with people. So until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you.